So You Think You Can Manage podcast. We are the So You Think You Can Manage podcast. We are a Philadelphia Phillies podcast. This is our inaugural episode. I am Shane. I'm joined with Biscuit, and I'm joined with Andrew. You have undoubtedly heard us from 45 different platforms, 45 different websites, and a million different shows. But we have put together this one here because we're brilliant, and we hope you think so too. We are a Philadelphia Phillies podcast, and the Philadelphia Phillies are playing right now. Vince Velasquez is on the mound, which is why we are talking to you. Because Lord knows we don't need to watch with all of our attention to Vince Velasquez. Entering this series against the Brewers, we are 13-15. That's right, 13-15. And still very much so in it in terms of where we could be in first place here. 13-15, fellas. Mets took 2 or 3 of us. I don't know that you can have a single positive thing to say about that Mets series. But Andrew, your biggest takeaway leading into this Milwaukee series. Let's start there. Let's talk about the absolute shit show that was the Philadelphia Phillies and the New York Mets.
At this point, a word that I'm going to use for my headline is carelessness. And I think Reese kind of demonstrated that in a big pivotal part of yesterday's game when you're holding a 2-run lead at that point and he gets a line drive hit at him. I know it's a tough play, so I'm not saying, of course you're not going to make 100% of those plays. That's not going to happen. But after that, you need to pick up the ball, get it back in, and instead he was careless, not paying attention. And Jonathan Vilars is able to score from third on that when he very lazily tosses the ball back into Maton. And I think that kind of summed up where the season's at now. And I think you can pinpoint that word to the offense as well. I mean, this offense should be better than where it's at, especially in that Mets series. I mean, you look at why we won the first game. It was on a strikeout, wild pitch, 2 runs having to score. I mean, is that not just sum up the season to it? And I feel like these guys are we go down looking a lot. They strike out so much. And I just think a big word there is you just see careless at-bats at times.
Look, I mean, you said it 100% accurately for all facets of the game at this point. Winning the one game that we did in that series the way that we did, and then looking just as disinterested and just fundamentally flawed as you can possibly look. A lot of it speaks to, in my opinion, the manager's handle of a team. And I know that that's an overblown thing, that managers aren't out there executing the plays, and there's only so much that they can do. But shit, I mean, we essentially ran Gabe Kapler out of town because Lord knows at this point John Middleton listens to Twitter and only Twitter in terms of every single decision that he's going to make. So we bring in a guy with a resume in Joe Girardi. So Biscuit, you've been pretty adamant in a lot of our text messages on Twitter with your disappointment thus far with our manager, which is why we are calling our show what we are calling our show. So I'm curious now, how much of this season at this point and the flaws and the mental lapses that we've seen, and then some of the decisions that he's made, do you place on the manager over the talent?
If you asked me a year ago, my answer would be different because, if you asked me back in the 2020 season, my answer would be different because I think it was a really easy blame to pinpoint everything on that bullpen because it was just so bad. But if you're asking me right now, going back to exactly what Andrew said, it's carelessness, man. He doesn't look prepared at some points. It feels like he doesn't really have much of a strategy going later into the game, especially with the bullpen and the double switches. Everything feels like it's kind of on the fly, out of rhythm. Nothing. It doesn't even make sense sometimes what he's doing later in games. And just the fact of the matter is, too, he just sticks to things that aren't working for too long. We've seen this now with Andrew McCutchen in the leadoff spot. We've seen this with constantly sticking with Roman Quinn, albeit who's having a great game tonight. But, we've just seen how these things play out. Going to David Hale when Trevor Story's up to bat with the bases loaded, when Pete Alonso is up to bat with the bases loaded. In winnable games, it's just it's what's the game plan here, Joe? So it's very frustrating. I do think a lot of this blame is fallen on Girardi so far this season, and rightfully so. You bring in a guy like that to make a difference, and it looked better under Gabe Kapler. I don't think you can, say that's not a true statement in some aspects. So I'm disappointed, Shane.
Yeah, look, I disappointed is the word and the tone, at least to open this show, and hopefully, Lord willing, next week we have a more positive tone. But we're going to stay as emotionally in the moment as we possibly can. So we close out a really disappointing series against the Mets, and a lot of the things that we were talked a little bit here, and we'll continue to talk about in this particular episode. The word and feeling around that is disappointment. One of the things going along with disappointment is the fact that this division is at this point now, 20 some games into the season, 25 games into the season. We are the tightest division in baseball. That does not mean we are a good division. We absolutely are not. It makes absolutely no sense. We were looking forward to having a powerhouse division and just 19 games a year beating the hell out of one another in this division. And that's what we were so looking forward to. So a series so early on against the Mets like this, after already playing the Mets in two prior series, it was to me to beat up on one another, which we kind of did. But to be in this way, it's disappointing. This isn't the Mets Phillies rivalry that I wanted. This was the Mets Phillies, Joe Girardi, and the umpires. Like, there's entirely too many hands to piss me off in a 3-game series that we just watched. So from that series, we saw some major things that didn't work. Let's kind of distill them down into subcategories and sub thoughts as to each one of those things, is why they didn't really work, what things we need to see change going forward in this Brewers series, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth on in a bit. But just as a result of the things we've seen in the last 96 hours of baseball from the Philadelphia Phillies, let's start with this offense. We had guys going into last night's game. These numbers have since changed, but we had Andrew McCutchen hitting just at 200 over the last week of baseball, and just miserably playing his position out there in left field. So much so that he's actually getting his eyes checked right now and not in the lineup. Rhys Hoskins was hitting under 100, under $150 over his last week. Didi 115, obviously the big hit last night with the 3-run home run that made me just so giddy, just full on hard. Awesome. Loved it. And then the rest of the game happened. And then the collective center field position hitting under 050. Didn't know that was possible. So the offense right now doesn't have a whole lot of bright spots outside of the Maton, outside of Real Muto to an extent, and then Harper, who's obviously just not a human being. I don't know how you get hit by 97 in the face and just take a couple days off and come back out there. But diving into this offense right now, let's focus on the negatives. Let's get those out of the way real quick. What are some of the things that you need to see from some of the guys that I've mentioned so far? Biscuit, I'm going to start with you.
You just need to see more, for lack of better ways to phrase it, Shane. Look, the bottom line is you have two people who you would say in the everyday lineup right now who are performing up to expectation, well, exceeding those expectations with Bryce Harper and JT. But outside of that, Rhys, every couple of days when he gets hot and, goes on one of those tears where he hits about 3 or 4 home runs in a stretch of games. But other than that, Andrew McCutchen, you alluded to it, has been abysmal. Really sad to see, because one of the greatest players I've ever got to see growing up, going back to your time playing Little League Baseball, you imitate the stars, you imitate Kutch because he's one of the best at the time. So it's really hard to see him this way. But even beyond Kutch, you have Didi Gregorius, who has not been up to standard, both offensively and defensively. Alec Boehm, who you really expected to kind of be one of the key cogs in this lineup, who is not performing up to standard as well. And if you really want to go beyond that too, another thing that's been pretty abysmal for this team is this team's bench offensively.
Yes.
Outside of Brad Miller, Matt Joyce going into tonight had an OPS of 493 and an OPS plus of 43, and the league average OPS plus is 100. So that's pretty terrible. And I think they mentioned that on the broadcast that he's like 0 for his last 28. So that's great. Kingery, I think he was optioned today, sent back down to the minors, yep. But one hit in his however many plate appearances that he had since his call up, so he's looked swell at the plate. And then Andrew Knapp too, only batting 172. And then obviously we've alluded already to what's happening in center field as well. So really just sad performances all around from this team offensively, if they're not named Bryce Harper or JT Realmuto.
So that's a big thing with that. You take a look at what this lineup has looked like in terms of an order, in terms of who's following whom. not a whole hell of a lot has really changed. They haven't shaken up a ton. They haven't, to me, when you sit there and, again, baseball's a long season, so you do have to kind of stick with guys to a point. But when you saw the type of struggles, and we've talked about this on a previous Chasing the Pennant podcast, when you see a struggling Andrew McCutchen out there, night in and night out, at a certain point, it behooves the player, it behooves the lineup, and it behooves all of us who watch this freaking team to see him slide back in the lineup and figure something else out, even if it's a non-traditional leadoff guy for a week, 2 weeks, whatever it needs to be. Let's try to get him right. Andrew, how much of the lineup's continued just lack of production at this point? It wasn't great last year either, but under Girardi, we haven't seen great managerial decisions that said, that's a difference maker right there. He helped pull this person out of the slump that he is in. How much do you attribute of the offensive woes thus far to the stubbornness of a manager in Joe Girardi, or, as Biscuit alluded to, what other options do we have right now?
I think I'm going to go on the side more of I just think these guys aren't performing right now. I think there's only, again, I think you said it earlier on the show already, Shane. I think there's only at some points so much a manager can do. And I think that's where you kind of turn to your hitters. And I think I heard this the other day working in athletics, and I kind of heard this from our athletic director. Sometimes, like, your head coach is as good as your assistant coaches are too. So I think that's kind of where you got to look too in the terms of, I mean, Girardi's job, yes, he's going to be the overall manager and stuff, but where's the hitting coach in all this? Like, where's the hitting coach come into play? And we saw that a lot in the 08-09 era, even in just the whole division champions era in those 5 years. Like, everyone loved the coaches there. Everyone, like, Rich Doobie was a player favorite. Milt Thompson was a favorite. Like, they all were clubhouse guys as well. And that's where I kind of turned to a little bit more as well, is where's Joe Dillon and all this? It's just like, because he was supposed to come in and be a huge asset as well, with how well he put that Washington Nationals offense in there with Harper, Rendon at the time. Trey Turner's obviously been a very good player, and they've been looked at as a high-powered offense. So I want to turn to the assistant coach as well. I feel like those guys in baseball don't get talked about as much because, I mean, real quick to cross-reference sports, I mean, you look at when the Eagles struggle, how many people are calling out Jim Schwartz when the defense isn't doing well? Like, they're not calling out Doug Peterson at times. You're calling out the defensive coordinator, and I think that kind of goes in this kind of sport as well, is that's his job, is to go out there and help without the hitting. And I think he's got to get some of the blame as well. And then a big part for me is the leadoff spot. And I think you guys kind of alluded to it as well, is I think at this point you have to try somebody different. Like, even when McCutchen can't go, why is Matt Joyce batting leadoff tonight? Like, he's batting 120 on the year. Like, in what world, if you're going to try some weird, odd leadoff hitter, why is Matt Joyce the pick? He is hitting 120. That's where I bring Girardi into some of the lineup decisions there, because you look at this Phillies offense, when are they at their best? It's when we have a good leadoff hitter. Like, why was this team so good when we first got McCutchen? It was because what was he able to do at that leadoff spot? It was he constantly got on base, whether it was a single or a walk. And I think, and then that's when these guys get to hit with runners on, and that's when their favorite thing is to do is hit with guys on, that they work at bats and all that. And I think that's why it took off so well. And obviously, without the leadoff production, these guys, all their numbers go down. So I think, as weird as it is, you're going to have to try at this point not a normal leadoff hitter. Like, that's just where you're at. Like, you've played a full month of baseball. I think it's desperation mode in terms of that lineup. And I mean, it's weird. You already hit that, but you're on what? Your fifth center fielder. I mean, basically you're not trying any other leadoff hitters. I think Gene Segura is going to be that guy when he comes back from the year he's having. But I think the leadoff spot has been a big issue there. And then I want to pinpoint it to the hitting coach as well. I think he plays a factor.
Yeah, so I'm a big overhead of the organization. Like, from the top on down, everyone has a role, and if everyone does that role appropriately, no one really has to talk. I just had this argument on Twitter with someone about the Philadelphia Flyers. Like, if you're successful within your role under the confines of the vision of the organization, theoretically you're good. No one should talk. I don't know if everyone's on the same page right now, so I do think it's tough when you take a look at a Dillon right now, who, let's call this for what it is. Like, that's a Harper guy. You brought him here for Harper, and awesome. Do what you want to do. But there's got to be some rollover to the other players here. My biggest concern, despite the individual hitting successes or failures of any of these players, when you do take a look at the one who is ushering the final notes on that lineup card. It is Joe Girardi. And you can't go in with a leadoff hitter of Andrew McCutchen every single night having zero production, especially when we're back with the National League having a pitcher who right now our pitchers probably are out hitting our center fielders and our leadoff hitters. It's ridiculous. And that's how bad it is. So that's two positions. Our center fielder is going to be one of those positions. And at this point, we're so unhealthy already on the season. You're getting a Matt Joyce out there fairly regularly. You're getting a completely snake-bitten Alec Bohm out there in the middle of the lineup, not really having the opportunity to plug things in. Right now, if it isn't 2 through, and 2's arguable with Rhys Hoskins, but 2 through 5, you pretty much don't have to watch the offense. Go do whatever you want. I walk my dog and just try to make him shit. That's all I do, because I don't need to watch the rest of the offense right now. And that's a Girardi thing to me. And that's what's really disappointing with him. He's supposed to be a difference maker. He's supposed to be a guy that, has the resume and has the ability to go into a talented locker room, which there is talent here. Certainly not the talent that he had in New York, but talent nonetheless, to come in here and really speak the language of these players and pull the greatest of results out of them. And to this point, we haven't seen it. But that's the negative stuff so far. There's worlds more negative things if you want to talk about the inadequacies on the defensive side of the ball, the inability to, ever be on the right side of something umpiring wise. I think that Alec Bohm thing early on in Atlanta we've just dug our grave for the rest of eternity. We are now never going to get a call, and that's disappointing. But let's take some positives from that Mets series. Alec Bohm did start to get going a little bit, and that is hugely important. He continues to hit the ball hard when he's at the plate, just happens to go right at people. So let's go to Andrew. I'll start with you. Some positive thing that you need to take from that Mets series that we're hoping to see as we continue on, and we are still in the 6th inning as we're recording this, and it is still, I don't know how the hell Vince Velasquez is still on the mound, but he is 4-1. So, but what is one thing that you need to see carried on into this Milwaukee Brewers series, a positive aspect of that New York Mets series there?
I'm going to go the direction of the starting pitching. I think we can talk about the bullpen issues all we want, but I think the one strong point we have seen so far for the majority of the time is the starting pitching, and I think that's something, just past the Brewers series, I think you're going to need that for the whole season at this point. You look at, we already were laughing about that first Mets win there. You win 2-1. I think that shows you how good that the pitching was that day. You look at the final on Saturday, you lose the game 5-4, but again, you're going in. Zach Wheeler gave you a chance to win. I know he struggled in that opening inning, but after that, what did he do? He battled back, was phenomenal the rest of the game, and I think that's a good sign. You look at Zach Eflin. I think he's not finally, but he's figured it out after we all questioned, was he going to be able to stay in this rotation? Obviously, he made the adjustments. I think that's tremendous. You know what you're going to get out of Aaron Nola. You know what you're going to get out of Zach Wheeler. And I think that's been one phenomenal thing so far this year is what I've seen from Eflin. And I'll just pinpoint to him because, again, I think we know what you'll get out of Nola and Wheeler. But I think the adjustment Eflin's made throughout his career has just been incredible to me, at least. I think he's kind of went in, recognized what pitcher he can be, and he's kind of told the coaching staff what he will be. And I think everyone's kind of made that adjustment to him. And he kind of had an unfair shot here, having been forced to kind of throw the way he didn't like to. And even yesterday, he kind of ran into a couple jams here and there, but he was able to figure a way out of it. And I think that goes to show the adjustment he's able to do. So I'm going to look at Eflin to continue what he's doing throughout the season, but especially the starting pitching as a whole for the Brewers series, because obviously with him going yesterday, he won't throw in the Brewers series. But I think you're getting that out of Vince tonight, surprisingly as well. So you'll see if the bullpen can hold it. But I think if the starting pitching can keep you in the games, the offense is eventually going to get going, and we'll start winning.
Yeah, look, I hope so. And this is a really good Brewers team, a team that took 3 or 4 out in LA. They're 17-11 on the year entering tonight. The fact that we've gone at this point 5 2/3 so far at the time of recording, with Vince Velasquez giving up just a single run, it's super impressive right now, and it's very necessary. Going on the Eflin thing, hand in the air, this is one of those moments. I loathed Eflin for no real reason. He just bored the hell out of me. And you know what? He's a boring pitcher, and I'm cool with it. The guy's good. He just knows how to pitch. There are a lot of guys who are going to forever rely on velocity, and when that velocity dips, they're not going to have the ability to kind of tap in and find a new way to be successful with a lesser velocity, because they don't have the pitching repertoire that a guy like Eflin has, and the control of the amount of pitches that he has. He's just a really smart pitcher, and he gets it. And for that reason, I mean, when you take a look at the top three pitchers in this rotation, I do very much so feel like anytime the three of them go out, we have a better than not chance to win, theoretically, if the offense does a modicum of what they're capable of doing. We should win those games. At the very least, we're in them, and that really lessens the stress of a bullpen that's already mildly underperforming and also dealing with COVID issues throughout the years, injury things throughout the year, and just some tough defensive breaks. It's really hard to pitch with the defense they have behind them. So it is important to have the starting pitching going in the way that they are. One thing, look, I've been oddly okay with the bullpen. I don't know where you're at, Biscuit, but one thing that I have noticed in terms of Andrew's earlier point and the relevance and how much we put on our assistant coaches here, Caleb Cotham seems like he is a guy that is just like, he's young. He doesn't give a shit. Like, he is 100% going to go out there and talk to someone middle of an at bat, doesn't care. I feel like I've seen him out there 5 times a night, every night of the season. And I love that. Like, I'm an over communicator. Like, I'm good with that. How are you with that, Biscuit? How much do you think that helps a younger bullpen like this? And then even some of the older guys who are learning how to pitch with different mechanics and velocities.
I think it was mentioned on the broadcast too, but it feels like every time he goes out there and talks to a reliever when they're kind of getting caught up in a little bit of a jam, it kind of unjams them. So, and I'm the same way, Shane. I'm an over communicator. I'd rather have the plan told to me 1,000 times just so I know,
Yep.
1,000 times over rather than, going willy-nilly. So I really enjoy that. And I do think it is a benefit to both our younger guys and our veterans as well. Look, I think one of the biggest complaints that comes out of the Gabe Kapler era was the fact that the communication was often at times lacking or non-existent or not transparent, I guess is the best word to go with there. And it feels like a lot of guys just weren't on the same page with what they were being asked of. So I think having this guy who, isn't afraid to go out there in the middle of an at-bat and say, think about what we talked about. Think about your routine. Think about this pitch or, whatever you might say to a guy. Maybe just goes up there, says something funny to calm him down. Whatever he's out there doing, it works. And I agree with you. I think the bullpen hasn't been stellar, but it certainly hasn't been as bad as it's been. I think you saw that on display a little bit in this last series with the Mets, especially in Game 1. The bullpen was electric most of that night, outside of the dramatic, I believe it was the 7th or 8th inning with the strikeout. But I've been impressed with Caleb Cotham so far. I don't have any real complaints. I like the step forward that Eflin has taken. I don't know how much of an effect that has, Caleb Cotham has on that. But I like what I've seen from the majority of Phillies pitchers outside of like Matt Moore and David Hale, the bane of my existence.
I just don't have any idea how that man made the roster. It's just absolutely unbelievable to me.
I think, does anyone else get a feeling, well, I've been talking about Joe Girardi a little bit, I think it plays into him coaching some of those guys at the Yankees. I really do. I think he was with him over there, and even Ronald Torreyes. I mean, there's a reason no one went after him last year when we called him down. He's a free agent again this offseason. Who's the only team I think contacted him? It was the Phillies again. I think, and obviously we all like Didi, so I mean that one's fine for us. But like I think the other one, you can question those two. And I think with the David Hale experiment, I just think it's interesting. I think they were trying to have Archie Bradley be that guy in the high leverage situations, and obviously with him going down. But to what Biscuit said earlier, you're not willing to change. Like if you tried it once or twice, fine, but it clearly didn't work. At what point do you make that change to the Connor Brogdon or the Sam Kerr not? And I think that kind of goes to show with the game this year, or game being played now, is I read Sam and Connor were both unavailable yesterday. And I'm like, they haven't pitched every day. Like, how are they unavailable? They threw like once in the last 3 days. So like, and I know we had the Pat Neshek whole thing when he was only one time. So it's like, are these guys telling Girardi they can only go once or twice?
No, it's a Girardi thing.
Look, Connor Brogdon's in the second season of his major league career. If he's told to go out, and do another night, like he's gonna go out. Like he's a fresh arm. I just don't get it. I don't see the appeal of David Hale. when you have guys like, don't be afraid to use guys on back-to-back nights, because it's cost us multiple games now that we could have easily won. And it's just watching him, like, it goes back to what we talked about earlier about what we've seen from him and his accountability and his preparedness. It's just non-existent when you have the bases loaded and you think to yourself, okay, I know I used, Connor Brogdon the night before for like 11 pitches and Sam Coonron threw, 2 nights ago. But man, David Hale, he looks like he could just give up a 3-run double right. And he just puts them in the game. Like, that's literally what I think happens when it's just like, gosh, I could see it right now. They're melting down. This was my plan all along, Phillies fan. It's like an evil, twisted thing.
Just an emotional masochist over there. Just how much torture can he endure? I do wonder, and I'm curious about what you guys think about this. So obviously, Girardi is managing for the better part of 2 decades. At this point, I think he's on year 15 or 16 as a major league manager. Early on in his tenure, like, the game's very different. Like, you may have a reliever throw 30 pitches, 40 pitches because your starter's gone 7-8 innings, because that's a normal thing for a starter. You're not having these guys who are now asked to come in and throw 3 batters, or asked to throw just to complete an inning. Like, you may throw 15 pitches in a completely non-stressed environment. You should be able to throw the next game of a doubleheader, in my opinion. Like, that's a very different thing. How much do you guys think the changes of the game and the style of the game, because again, take a look at the rotations that he had in New York when he was there, and the way that he is able to use, well, and the American League, the extra relievers, so that's also part of it. But when you take a look at him, he just looks like he's trying to manage in a different era of baseball. I don't understand not using guys back-to-back nights when the game has shifted to a reliever-specific game. That's where we're at. Starters are going for, what did they say in the broadcast last night? 4 1/3 innings is like the average of starting pitching so far. That's absurd. That's ridiculous. Don't even have starting pitchers. Fuck it. Why not? Let's get crazy. Everyone's a reliever. Let's just see what happens. That, to me, it just doesn't make sense it's early in the year. You got to win these baseball games. They do count. We're in a division right now that is the tightest in baseball, separated by just 2.5 games at most. A series literally changes everything and propels you into a different position. And that series puts you into the next series and the next series. And you just can't keep giving away games. I can't remember the question I was just about to ask you guys. I'm so pissed off.
Was it about how much we think the game changing has hurt Girardi?
That's correct, Andrew. So you can answer that. Jesus Christ.
I think it does play a factor. In all honesty, I think we've kind of touched on why it's play a factor, because of how it seems like he's worried to make a change. Like, it seems like he's worried about what a change will do, so he's going to continue to manage just like the way he did in the past. Because, I mean, he does seem a little bit like a stubborn guy, and he's probably sitting there like, well, it works for me. It won me a World Series with the Yankees. I won multiple division titles with the Yankees as well. So I'm going to do things the way that has worked, and I've been proven as a manager, and that's why I got a second chance after taking a year off, and that's the way I'm going to win or die. And I think he's going to go down that road. Like, he's basically saying, I'm going to succeed this way or fail this way. And he's willing to take the risk of, if it fails, he's going to fail, and he'll probably be out sooner rather than later if he doesn't start making the changes.
So going along with that part too, and I actually remember the actual question I was going to ask now. Now, Biscuit, I'm going to ask you, despite the fact that you're relatively young in comparison to me, and your history of the game is slightly different. But do you ever recall at any point in your childhood, in early baseball watching, seeing the amount of pitchers injuries that we have now?
If so, maybe I didn't notice growing up, just because, back then you don't have Twitter, you don't, have a phone where you're surfing the web. Like, you're so in tune with everything happening in the game right now. To me, I to go back and think about it, obviously I would say now, because you're so connected to the game. Like, you get everything about baseball at the tip of your fingers 24/7. It's so accessible. So obviously I'm going to have to say now. But to tie back in with what Andrew was saying too, I don't think it's necessarily Girardi not being able to adapt to how the game is played. I do think that's part of the issue here. But I also, coming off the pandemic shortened season, guys having to, ramp all the way up for that season and then shut down and then ramp back up again, and the concern of 162 games now. I think he's just being a little overly cautious as well. I think if things were a little bit more normal, you probably see a bit more of him trusting his guys going on back-to-back nights. And I think we'll get to that later in the season. Like, I do think this will change where he's going to have to, if we're in a stretch run and if we're in a playoff chase or chasing a playoff spot, he's going to have to go to those guys on multiple nights, 2 or 3 nights, and say, look, you got to go for it. I do think we'll see that. But I think right now, more so than him just not being able to adapt to how baseball is played, because I don't think that's true. The guy, he was here in 2017 managing. I think that was his last year with the Yankees. So it's not like he's been away for, Tony La Russa, who's been out for decades. It's a little bit different. So I don't think that's the case. I just think he's become an overly cautious man, and that's fine. But you need to know when to push the envelope a little bit. And I think he needs to start learning how to make that adaptation.
Andrew.
See, I agree. I would agree with that if it was a lot of the starting pitchers, but he's letting those guys go long. So, I don't think he's too concerned. Why would he be so concerned about these relievers that only throw 1 inning a night more than he would be having these starters? I could see the long season stretch for that wise, because, you don't want Nola to go an extra inning, but he's sending guys out for extra innings and all that starting wise. That's why I'm confused why he doesn't make some of the changes to the pen, because these guys are only going out for an inning or two, at most. So why that's my biggest concern, and why I think it's not necessarily being overly cautious, because to me you would see it from a lot of the other guys starting wise too, because even the lineup, you're not seeing, outside of McCutchen obviously with his struggles, you don't see him giving any of them rest either.
Well, going off your point there with the rotation, I think the reason you're seeing Nola, Wheeler, and Eflin going deep into games is because you have 2 starters in Chase Anderson, Matt Moore / Vince Velasquez, who you would consider God's gift to the earth if they gave you, 6 innings of baseball. So the bullpen's being taxed. The bullpen's getting used. I understand that, especially on those nights when, Chase Anderson's only going 4 innings. You got to turn it over to the pen. You're going to be using more than one reliever in that situation. So they're getting their opportunities. I think the biggest thing I've seen with Joe Girardi is that he doesn't know the concept, almost how Gabe Kapler was so no one's going to have a role, everyone's going to jump in whenever, no one's going to know what they're going into any given night. As hectic as that was, Joe Girardi is too rigid with Hector Neris, you are my closer. Setup man Alvarado, you are my setup man Brogdon, you are my setup man Coonrod. Middle relievers, it is you Burning Kinsler. But it feels like every high leverage situation, he's just there's only one man.
High leverage hail.
God, high leverage hail for me.
Only if we could actually use that. That'd be perfect. He was actually good at that.
He's just a piece of shit.
Oh.
Not a good baseball player. I don't know. My whole thing with the uses of pitchers, and at this point, look, it's clear that bodies, the evolution of what the body can do and what these players can do is so vastly different from what it was years ago. I mean, you could count the amount of guys that were throwing them, 95 or over on one hand, in the late 90s and early 2000s. It just wasn't what it was today. And it is literally the most violent thing you can do is throw a baseball. So I get that from a health perspective to an extent, that you're relatively unknown as to what that does to someone's arm. How many bullets does that arm have, in a single season or over the course of a career, and wanting to keep guys healthy for the long run. But at a certain point, they're not fucking healthy. This is not working. Guys are getting hurt. So just let's throw them. Let's get them into a different routine, allow for their body and muscles to do the things that they naturally need to do, and see what happens. Because right now, this is a Girardi thing. He does not want to pitch guys back-to-back nights. You could throw 3 pitches. You could warm up on Saturday night. He doesn't want you to throw on Sunday. That is his mindset, and it is maddening. But at this point, we are seeing guys hurt left and right, arms breaking down, going through dead arm periods, more so, in my opinion, than at any point in Major League history. At a certain point, you got to shift some of what you're doing. And I do think that I don't want to call it coddling. I think that's a really just cheap word that's thrown around a lot at this point because, we all are at certain points compared to what previous generations were. But that's kind of what it is. It is, sitting there and just really massaging these people's, these pitchers' egos and their bodies to make sure that they're 100% comfortable going out. When the reality of it is they don't need to be 100% comfortable. They're professional athletes. Their bodies are going to be at 85% some nights, and it's still better than what most of the league can do in certain capacities. So again, I'm not big on the non back-to-back nights. I'm not big on the way the pitches are used today. I think that it inevitably causes a little bit more injury or risk towards injury than what years prior and decades prior have. But let's move into, so again, we're in the 7th inning whilst recording right now, and one of the newest additions to our bullpen, who is not terrible, is Girardi. He's on the mound right now. So 4-1 still at this point. I don't know why I'm updating you guys as if you guys care. You're going to listen to this and you're going to already know the score of the game. But just so you know where our mindset is at, when things change, you'll hear why. But tomorrow night, so we're not going to talk too much on this outside of the fact that JT Realmuto just giddy. Just love it. Upper deck home. And there is nothing better at Citizens Bank Park than a right-handed power bat JT's not even a power bat. He's just a guy. But when a right-handed bat takes something upper deck on that side, it's so sexy. It's lovely. Like, for whatever reason, my brain immediately goes to John Mayberry Jr. taking pitches up there, and I hated John Mayberry Jr. So every time someone else does it, even if it's someone on the opposing team, I get a little fucking excited. I really do. I just love, because right-handed power swings don't look as sexy as left-handed ones. So when things like that happen, it's like the greatest happy accident ever. Gotta love it. But anyway, that's tonight's game that we're currently recording through. Tomorrow night, we have Aaron Nola is going to be on the mound. Aaron Nola at this point is 2-1 with a 3.11 ERA. We need him at this point to go 7 innings, as we've discussed. A depleted bullpen at this point. We now know that Coonrod's unavailable tomorrow. And we will be going up against Lauer, who hasn't really pitched much in the last 2 years. But one start so far this year, successful, 5 innings, no earned runs. So that's game 2 of the 4-game series. Then we have Peralta going up against Chase Anderson. Why do you not hate Chase Anderson, Biscuit? Did we talk about this?
I just think, outside of the start in Colorado, what I've seen is exactly what you really want from a 5th starter. I just want to be kept in games, and I really don't have a reason why to say he hasn't done that. And I don't.
That's
I feel,
fair.
Even though he's not going very deep into games, only about 4 or 5 innings consistently, you're getting, 4 or 5 innings of 3 or 4 runs max. I don't even think he's had many 4-run games so far this season. So it's, it's nothing sexy. It's nothing glamorous. It's not Aaron Nola. It's not Wheeler. It's not Eflin. But it's consistency. And it's good enough to say, you know what? At the end of the day, I'm not the reason why this game was a loss, or I might have helped why this game was a win because I kept us in the full time, kept us tied until, gave the offense to come back. So I just think that's fine. There doesn't need anything to be glamorous about a 5-man in the rotation. So I'll take it, especially for $3-4 million.
That's fair. So in the 4-game series, it does close out with Zach Wheeler and Brandon Woodruff, which Woodruff just murders us every single time he's on the hill. He just looks like Cy Young. And he's a really good pitcher, don't get me wrong, but he is not as good as the Phillies make him look. So knowing the fact that we have Woodruff going up against Wheeler, I would say it's a toss-up. It's going to be a really good closeout game, in my opinion. Anderson versus Peralta, I mean, holy shit. Like, just that to me it's a chalked-up loss. And then again, I know I'm moving backwards at this point, but game 2 of the series is going to be Aaron Nola versus Lauer. Nola has to win that baseball game. If all things go or continue going the way that they have gone thus far tonight, we will, when you listen to this, we will have taken the opening game of the series. Lord have mercy, and we'll have we'll be up 1-0 in the series there, with a need to win from Nola. Pray to God you're going to win from Chase Anderson, and then just a really great closeout game in the back end. So, Andrew, for you, of the 3 remaining games here, what game are you most looking forward to, and what game do you just have to have?
I think I agree with you. Aaron Nola is the game you have to have because I know his counterpart obviously hasn't thrown much so far this year. So on paper he looks good, but I think that game should be written in a Phillies standpoint of that's the one he should win. Because like you said, Woodruff's the Brewers' best pitcher. He's going against Zach Wheeler, so that is a true toss-up because you don't know what you're going to get out of him. Obviously, we talked about Chase Anderson just now. I don't mind Anderson yet, but with your offensive struggles – right now, yeah, the three, like you said, Biscuit, the 4 runs, 4 runs probably is what you want out of your 5 starter. It gives you a chance to win, especially when this offense is at the best. But right now, if you get that from Anderson, I mean, you're struggling to score 4 runs a night. And so I think that's why that one, I agree with you, Shane. That one is probably the one you'd most likely say is a loss. But I don't think there's any reason you can't get 3 out of the series. But the one that at least split, assuming you do hold on tonight, would be tomorrow is the must win, quote unquote must win.
Sure. Biscuit, do you have a different must-win or key game of the series?
Well, I want them all to be wins.
Well, we all want them to be wins.
No, if I had it my way, that would be the case. But no, realistically, I feel like this will be a split. I can't imagine the Brewers not shutting our offense down completely, at least two of these games. With a guy like Brandon Woodruff, who's absolutely having the guy's got like a 1.9 earned run average so far to start the season. I think
he's filthy.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's often a really underrated guy, I think, too. You never hear a lot of fanfare about him, which I think is a little bonkers. But even that bullpen has been relatively good so far this season. Yep. Rotation's phenomenal. I think the biggest thing you try to hope for is that Brewers, that they don't hit, because the offense has been struggling. I think they have one of the lowest OPSs in the National League as a team collectively. So you really hope that just continues. You pray that kind of continues, especially when Anderson's on the mound. But I realistically see a split for this series, which sucks. But
one more thing we need out of this series at this point is to get healthy. I mean, taking a look at the lineup tonight to open it up, and Reese just getting a day off, but the Harper with that wrist, bunting twice there in the closeout game in that 8th inning, and then just not looking right, in his later at bat as well. Kutch with the eyes. There's some holes to be filled here. To get healthy and to get mentally right is going to be huge, not just for the series but going forward as well. But again, so that's where we're at now. Next week we'll be talking a little bit more about the results of this series. But before we close this one out, one thing we're going to do a bit of a roundtable thing at the end of each show. We hope that this show is going to bring out some natural debate between the three of us. We all fairly similarly minded, but we do have some different takes. So hopefully we can bring some of those out and stir up a little bit of controversy. So each week at the end of the show, we are going to bring up any one particular topic. Each host is going to bring one up, try to give it just a few minutes for the other host to kind of sit there and dissect. So I'm going to start this one tonight with Biscuit. I'll close it out. We'll go Biscuit, and we'll go Andrew, and then we'll go to me. So Biscuit, what's your roundtable discussion point for today?
So my roundtable discussion, and please forgive me, Shane, I brought this up on a show many, many moons ago, I think with Andrew and Rob, and I want to talk about really just the state of this organization currently and when we might just have to accept the inevitable, that the Phillies just aren't that good and there's no talent in the farm system, no big free agent signing, no manager, no president of baseball operations, no one who could save the sinking ship. So you look at this team right now, you have one of the highest payrolls in Major League Baseball. You don't have much room in the budget to fix anything significantly. Sure, you might be able to go out and sign another star, but what's that going to do when there's so many facets of this team that are just mediocre, if not bad? So what do you guys think about really just hitting the reset button once again? You do have some tradable pieces. I think at the end of the season, you have to sit there and wonder if just going on with this roster that's not going to get any younger, you know what you're going to get from most of them, if not all at this point. Where do you go from there if this is another season without playoff baseball?
I think I'm against that, to be honest. I think this team is too good to do a full-on rebuild. Yeah, you might fix a couple pieces, but this thing, I still believe this is going to come together. I still have faith in Girardi. I think with this, we talked about how tough this division can be. Like, say you turn it around and still win close to 90 games and you don't make the play. And I think that has a big factor is where this team will be and why you missed the playoffs. Like, if you miss this playoffs by a game or two at 90 wins, then yeah, I'm not ready to. You just need to fix the pieces. If you don't make the playoffs because you only win 75 games, then yeah, you're talking about a different story at this point. But I don't think this team's gonna be that bad to only win 75 games. I think we're still gonna be north of that. I think we're gonna be still north of that 85, a little bit more than that mark. I think this team will get it together. I think my big thing is there's too many pieces on this team to not turn it around, and I think with Dave Dombrowski here, it's eventually going to happen. So I'd be fully against reset mode, just because again you still have Harper and you just signed JT long term. It's too early to give up on that. And honestly, if we did reset mode, I'd be more angry at this organization than ever, probably.
So it's hard. So I've always been like vehemently against the term retooling, because that's that 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You're hoping that whatever move you make at a margin may be the thing that defines that next move. Are we actually going all in? Are we going to fully sell? But I do think that in this particular case, there are some valuable pieces here that may bring value to other organizations that maybe don't have to be part of our long-term future at this point. Our payroll situation is not great. But again, that's a short-term thing. That's just over the next really year and a half, 2 years now, the rest of this year and next year. I do think that if things are not trending in a direction of this team can compete and this team can win, I do think that there are going to be players at the deadline that maybe will be hard to see walk away. Some fan favorites, though, that may bring in and refuel a little bit of the farm system, because inevitably those pieces, maybe they are pieces that just don't have a long-term future here, or they have a different long-term vision. They're looking 2 years out in the free agent market, and they're thinking, you know what, I can get that guy, and that's going to replace this guy. So I just need another year here at second base, we'll say, at shortstop with Didi. Like, we know that's a short-term thing. I do think that the bones of this team, the core of this team, to me, is literally just JT, Bryce, Nola, and Wheeler. Everything else at this point is so and Bohm, is so movable. And so to me, a reset entirely tells me that you're moving one of the four of those guys, if not multiple pieces of the four, which I don't think you need or should do. But everyone else, go do what you want. And I'm throwing Eflin in there not because I want to see him gone, but because I believe that there is a lot of value in that arm. And if they believe that, a guy who has a history of knee injuries at this point, maybe they believe his shelf life is a little bit lesser than that of, the other two. That's a guy he's going to net you a decent haul. I'm not advocating for a move of him. I'm just saying I would understand it. So I think that I'm going to use that term that I don't normally use and say a retool is probably in the organization's best interest. And I would encourage fans and people within the organization to not be married to the name or the person, and be married more so to the vision and what that vision looks like beyond just the year of 2021. Because inevitably it's going to be about the sustained winning, and we haven't seen that in over a decade. Biscuit, that was a good one to start. I felt like you just started us off with the deepest one that you possibly could. You're like, the whole organization sucks. Where do you want to start to fix it?
Well, started last night at about 10:30, between 10:30 and 11 o'clock. Out to a Bozo Mets reliever, whatever his name is. And I just sat to myself and I said, what the fuck? How did I get here? Like, you ever seen Ratatouille when he jumps out of the window?
I love Ratatouille.
Yes, fantastic.
It made me cry the first time I saw it, but that's another story.
100%.
That's another story for another time. But when he's jumping out of the window and he's like, you're probably wondering, how did I get in this situation? No, that's
Oh, I love it. Biscuit, that was a good opening question, man. Well done. Andrew, let's move to you. Your roundtable discussion point for the show.
Yeah, I'm going to shift it away from the Phillies, but obviously stay inside baseball. And I want to get into a deep dive of how bad the umpiring, the MLB's consistency as a whole has been, and how we think we can fix that as a whole. Just because, I mean, you look around the league and we see Jose Alvarado get suspended for probably one of the weakest suspensions ever, but then you see Amir Garrett do the same thing in the Reds-Cubs game, if not worse, as they charge at each other. No suspensions or anything in that game. So, like, where's the consistency? And then how bad has the umpiring been from McCutchen questionably running out of the baseline to, what was his name? I think it was I think it was Brett Anderson on the Brewers gets called for interference trying to field a ground ball. And, like, they have replay in the game and we still can't fix some of this stuff. Like, where's the MLB at now in this stuff?
So I hate first of all, I love the fact that mistakes happen within games. Like, to me, if there was no replay whatsoever and shit like this happened, I wouldn't care so much. The fact that you've put replay in and you have the ability to correct things, that's what, like, why are you picking and choosing the things that you can or cannot correct? That's absurd to me. It's like, where do you draw that line? And your point of how they discipline players being so, there is no rhyme or reason for anything done. It's almost like how the NHL does it. And it's super disappointing. And when you find yourself on the wrong end of some of those decisions and on the wrong ends of some of those disciplinary actions, you are more frustrated and you start paying attention more around the league, just as you did. It's why you posed the question. To me, it's completely inexcusable. If I fuck something up at my job so regularly, I'm not going to have a job. And I understand that what I do is infinitely easier than being a major league umpire. When you factor in all of the attention, all the pressure, every single minute of the day there, it's impossible. I get that. Not a lot of people are running to be major league umpires. A lot of people are sitting there saying, I could do finance. You still have to hold them accountable. And if you're going to make players answer for poor decisions or things that happen, make the umpires answer to those things too. And that to me is step number one, because they get to just sit there behind their stupid little masks and just stare, point their finger out when someone offends them, which, by the way, put your big boy pants on. Holy shitballs. I can say what I want to you, as long as I'm not sitting there and saying anything horrendously derogatory of any particular manner, and I'm not coming at you personally for shit and your family. Like, just, we're pissed off. It's an emotional moment. Let that shit happen. Don't fucking throw someone out for that. That's ridiculous. I'm so angry about the state of that with baseball. But as a whole, man, to me, if you want to fix it, and I know that this might be the least sexy thing for anyone to hear, go away from replay entirely. And just say that human error is going to happen, and let's see how that emotion fuels the games. It's going to happen to both teams every single night. You might have an entire year where things are really bouncing your way, and then you go a decade where they don't. But at a certain point, like, hey, everyone's dealing with that circumstance. Human error, it happens. Great. Or every fucking thing in the game is reviewable. Now, if you want this game to move quicker, obviously, let's go with former. If you don't care about game speed and you just want it to be as accurate as possible, review everything. I don't care. Just pick one side of that fence. To me, I'd prefer the human error. And for us to not see every second of it replayed 500 times.
Real quick, just because this is perfect. Matt Joyce just got called out looking and got ejected.
Awesome.
That couldn't have been more on cue.
Dude, it's 3-2 on my, I'm not watching on the TV.
Okay.
I tried to stream it so that I could be more on path with you guys. But so now I get to watch this live and get pissed off like Andrew's laughing in the background. Biscuit, while I'm watching this, go ahead, give your answer.
I'm at, I think Bohm's up the bat on my feet, so I'm paying attention. But yeah, look, not much of a debate here. Not even for me on my end, too much to add. But it's disgraceful with the umpires and how poor they've been this season, all across Major League Baseball. You wonder if it's just carelessness and laziness. They just don't care anymore. They're trying to speed up the game. But it's pathetic. It's sad to see. And you're right, Shane, there's no consistency there. And you said it. If you can, be called out for what you're doing on the field as a player for not doing your job or your role as what's up to standard, then umpires should be called out too. Now, look, I'm a fan of replay when it's, working how it should actually work, which isn't as a fucking joke. But I like the fact that if there's a call that's obviously wrong, you're going to have a chance now to go in and fix it and get it right. And I like that because you don't know when that could come into play. Look, there might be a big moment in the game that could make or break your season, and that happens, and you need it in that moment, and it's like a blatantly obvious call that's going to get overturned. That could be huge. And I personally wouldn't want that moment to be robbed away from my team, and I wouldn't want that moment being robbed away from another team as well. As frustrating as it would be as an opposing fan, you don't want to see something like that. You don't want to see a crap call ruin it for someone, regardless of who it is. So that's where I stand on that.
I agree with you. And I think, Shane, to your point real quick on the emotion standpoint, why should Jose Alvarado be suspended? But then all these hitters, when they get a big time home run off the pitchers, they're able to show emotion and bat flip and show up the pitcher like
absurd.
that. But now Jose Alvarado strikes the guy out and he yells and screams and everything he's doing, but he gets punished for that.
I do think it's a culmination of the buildup of what led to that. Like, obviously he's not as amped up as he was last night if those first several series don't happen and those first few things don't happen. But still, and like, it's just, we're all adults. Like, we can be in the moment and then we can move on. To me, I just don't, it's fucking inexcusable. There is no consistency. And it is tough to see. Really tough to see. Good question, dude. All right, mine was significantly less deep than either of yours, and I tried to steer a bit of the managerial stuff away, but I am going to go to the Joe Girardi question. The question itself is very simple: do you still believe that today, May 3rd, 2021, that Joe Girardi is still a good major league manager? To me, I think it's really hard to tell if he is. So I'm curious, based on what he did in his 1 year in Florida, and then what he did with a stacked lineup in New York. Both lineups fairly talented, both rotations pretty good, and then he gets to Philadelphia. So I'm curious to see if you think right now, if you had to put your money on it, Joe Girardi is still a good manager. Biscuit, I'm going to start with you.
I'm just going to say no based off what we've seen so far so far this season and in 2020. Look, you just want more, you go in for this guy because you think he's going to make a difference. You basically boo Gabe Kapler out of the city, which is fine if that's the route you wanted to go in. It is what it is. Everyone has an opinion about it, but that's ultimately what happened, and along comes Girardi. Everything I felt like that was hyped up about this guy has turned out to just be not true. It looks like the team is worse on the field. It looks like they, aren't paying attention at times. The, mental aspect of the game is just always lacking. It felt like kind of how when Cesar Hernandez or Odubel Herrera made like one of those like mental lapses kind of things. Everyone's like, oh, it's a mental lapse. They're just not thinking about it. Well, that's what kind of feels like happening with almost every player on the field when they're on the diamond somewhere. And it's inexcusable. And going beyond that, you have the questionable decisions that we talked about earlier with the double switches, the bullpen decisions, the high leverage hail. I don't know, when it gets to a point when you have people like the three of us who genuinely have concepts and idea that we think would be better than what's being discussed and utilized with this team right now. I think it says something, man, because these decisions are glaring.
It is not great. What is also not great is we are currently in the 8th inning. Well, actually, I'm changing my mind. It is downpouring right now at CVP. Connor Brogdon can't find the zone to save his life. And I'm totally cool with a rain delay at this point and a closeout in a shortened game, giving me that 4-1 lead without another reliever taking another pitch. Andrew, your response to my question.
I'm going to disagree with you, Biscuit. I think he still is a good manager, and I think it's because I think there is a lot of similarities to Kapler, like you said, and I think Kapler's a good manager. I think there's still a lot of issues. Like, yes, he can change a thing here and there, but when it's all said and done, who else is he supposed to put out there in center field? Like, he's tried 5 guys at this point. Yes, he might put David Hale out there in certain situations, but at this point, like, again, you lost Archie Bradley. I think he was supposed to be the guy that was going to be that high leverage situation pitcher. I think I mean, if you're turning to a lot of these younger guys like Connor Brogdon, you already mentioned on this show, this is his basically second season, first full year in the league. Do you really trust him to go in there and get a guy like Trevor Story out or a guy like Pete
More than
Alonso?
Hale.
Maybe more than Hale, but there's still a good chance he's going to give up a big hit in that situation, just in that young kind of situation. So I think, again, has he done a fantastic job, best in the league? No, he hasn't. But am I going to sit here and say he's not a good manager? I think that's a little too much at this point. I think he still is a solid manager. And I think if you look around, like Shane said earlier, this division is supposed to be one of the best in the league. And I think partially why everyone's 500 is the way the schedule was set up. We came in here assuming the Phillies were going to beat up on the Mets. The Mets were going to beat up on us. We played 500 ball against basically all these good teams in the division and a great Cardinals team that's supposed to be really good. So in all honesty, the way he's managed a club that has more holes than we probably would have thought to be right around at 500, I think that's a positive spin for this club right now, where you're at, and why I think when you do get a Gene Segura and Archie Bradley, who was a top closer last year, I think it all is all going to still click.
I just don't. when you just have guys who, like, for example, why on God's earth is Matt, like, I get it tonight because you have Hoskins on the bench, but why on God's earth is Matt Joyce starting over Brad Miller most of the time in the outfield? I get he's probably a better defender, but he's ass at the plate, and Brad Miller has looked 1,000 times better than him. Why, when you have, Connor Brogdon, who I think prior to tonight threw 26 pitches over the last week, you don't, let him go an extra inning on Saturday night, or you don't bring him into that game on Sunday when you have Pete Alonso up the plate with the bases loaded. Look, it just comes down to the fact that there's decisions that should be made with confidence at this point, that everyone is looking and say, do this, Joe, and he does not do this. So I really just don't have a lot of, hope for the guy at this point when everything we've seen has been the wrong call. And sure, it's early, and sure, things can change, but I don't want to see – I don't think him and Gabe Kapler are that similar, because I know for a fact Gabe Kapler would not be using David Hale in a high leverage situation, because he was
Miller's nasty brother.
Yes. Like you just get like a completely different vibe with Gabe Kapler in that regard. And not to get on the whole Kapler thing, but he has this team in a better position than Girardi has them right now, and I do wholeheartedly believe that.
See, I don't know if I agree with that, just because we saw like Kapler basically managed a very similar team here, and he played 500 ball with this team. So I think that's where you're looking at. And I think, again, if you turn to some of these guys, like who would do, like, I think Kapler would have a similar situation in Hale. We saw him turn to a lot of veteran guys here that he would constantly use here. And I think that's kind of where you're at. Like, if you look at some of those guys, I'm blanking on who the veteran was we had when he was here that he'd constantly use, and that's why fans ripped on him so much. And cause think about all the fans that ripped on him so much was because of the guys he was bringing in, and that's who you have here at this point. And I think things kind of took a turn. And I think, to your point about Brad Miller, they did try him in left field for a few games, and he made a huge error in left field that cost us a few runs and ended up costing us a game. So you are going to go back, when you see that happen, you are going to go back to a Matt Joyce defensively to start there.
I get that, but just to go off your point about Brad Miller, that's fine, because Andrew McCutchen's going out and doing the same exact thing, and he's also batting 100 or batting 200.
But that's
batting 300. At least he's getting on base. At least he's hitting the ball and scoring runs. Like, look, the defense is going to be bad. It's not just in left field. It's all over the diamond. And also, going back to your point with Kapler, it just came down to the fact that it wasn't Gabe Kapler's faults were only magnified because of just who he was as a person. Joe Girardi's faults, a lot, just very glaring at this time.
Well, no, just think about this though. Like, so now we've talked about, you've tried 5 center fielders, you've tried 3 left fielders in McCutchen, Joyce, and Miller. You've tried 5 center fielders in the Kingery, and Kingery, Herrera, Hazley, Moniak. Like, what I guess my point is, you're basically running out right now a lineup of 5 to 6 guys. Like, a manager can only do so much. But we're talking about a huge hole in left field, a huge hole in center field. You've lost Segura and Gregorius for a season, and you're telling me this team's currently still only 2 games under 500? And, I mean, we just talked about this upcoming Brewers series. If you take care of business tonight, you win Nola's game, you'll be right back at 500, and your things are still up as you're sitting a half game out of first. So I have no issue. Like, yes, you can pinpoint left and right, like a certain decision here or there, but overall, I can't sit here and say Girardi's done a bad job.
So you think you can manage? We've run this one at 65 minutes so far tonight. This is our inaugural, that's a tough word to say when you've been speaking for 65 minutes, episode here for the So You Think You Can Manage podcast. We are going to close this one out now before we go into, because I have so much shit to say about what both of you said. So what we're going to actually do is stem this point and allow this one to grow over to next week. We will discuss more So You Think You Can Manage, and I certainly think that I could. I believe that you both think that you could too. Only one of us is correct. I'm going to let the audience decide which one that would be. Regardless, next week we have Atlanta for a weekend series, which we'll have the opportunity to just dissect that series because Monday is an off day for us. And then we head for the first time and we see Washington. So we'll also preview that series and we'll see what the division looks like heading into that next week. But I am Shane of 100,000 different podcasts. Andrew, it's AJ at AJ Santangelo, right, on Twitter?
AJ_Santangelo.
AJ_Santangelo on Twitter. He is of about 1 million podcasts. And then we have Ep.1 Biscuit over there of just several podcasts. You guys find me on Twitter. It's at GentlemanPod. We will see you guys next week for another episode of So You Think You Can Manage.